Thanks to black myth Wukong, the world is rediscovering the legend of the Monkey King. But the real story behind the myth is even more incredible. The real Xuanzang had no magic, no supernatural companions, and not even imperial permission. He crossed deserts, survived wars, and traveled thousands of miles alone in search of knowledge. This is the true journey of Xuanzang. In the 7th century, Chang'an was one of the greatest cities in the world. Merchants, monks, and envoys from across Asia met here. By then, Buddhism had been in China for centuries. Temples flourished, and Buddhist scriptures were constantly being translated. But to one young monk, those scriptures still contained too many contradictions. Different translations often disagreed, and the same concept could mean very different things from one text to another. That monk was Xuanzang. If the answers were unclear, why not go back to the source? In Journey to the West, one of China's 4 great classical novels, the monk Tang Xuanzang is sent by the emperor to retrieve Buddhist scriptures. But the real Xuanzang was never sent by the imperial court. In 627, at the age of 25, he secretly crossed the frontier and set off alone toward the unknown lands of the western regions. Sometimes the beginning of cultural exchange is simply one person refusing to settle for uncertain answers. After leaving Chang'an, Xuanzang continued westward. The Hexi Corridor, Yumen Pass, deserts, and endless stretches of the Gobi unfolded before him. This was nothing like the magical journey portrayed in later novels. The real Xuanzang had no monkey king. Sometimes he traveled alone. Other times he relied on caravans, local guides, regional kingdoms, and monasteries along the way. He crossed not only deserts, but also different languages, political systems, and beliefs. In the oasis kingdoms of Central Asia, he encountered unfamiliar clothing, writing systems, and customs. In distant lands, he carefully observed mountains and rivers, roads and trade routes, and the everyday lives of ordinary people. For Xuanzang, every mile of the journey was also an act of observation. He recorded the world piece by piece, where the rivers flowed, where temples stood, which roads were dangerous, which lands were fertile, which cities prospered, and which had already fallen into ruin. After years of travel, Xuanzang finally arrived at Nalanda, the greatest center of Buddhist learning in India. Here, monks and scholars from many different cultures gathered together. They studied sacred texts, debated ideas, and exchanged knowledge about philosophy, logic, language, and religious practice. Xuanzang became a disciple of the renowned master Shalabhadra. The questions that had troubled him for so long could finally be understood within a much broader intellectual tradition. The Buddhist scriptures had been his original destination, but in India, he encountered far more than scripture. He learned about monastic institutions, linguistic traditions, geography, and entirely different ways of understanding the world. 19 years after his departure, Xuanzang returned to Chang'an in the year 645. He brought back hundreds of Sanskrit scriptures, Buddhist images, and memories of distant civilizations. Emperor Taizong received him personally and supported his massive translation project. One man's journey was transformed into a national endeavor of knowledge. In Chang'an's translation bureau, Sanskrit texts became Chinese classics, while unfamiliar ideas were carefully interpreted for new readers. Mountains, kingdoms, cultures, and customs from distant lands were woven into a written world that people in Tang China could understand. The following year, the Great Tang Records on the Western regions was compiled from Xuanzang's dictation by his disciple Bianji. Across 12 chapters and roughly 120,000 Chinese characters, it documented the geography, history, politics, economy, religions, cultures, trade routes, and daily life of 138 kingdoms and regions that Xuanzang had visited or learned about. The road traveled by one man eventually became a book. More than 12 centuries later, the Great Tang Records on the Western regions found its way to Europe through the work of generations of sinologists. In 1857, the French scholar Stanislas Julien published a complete French translation in Paris. In 1862, a Russian abridged edition appeared in St. Petersburg. In 1884, the British scholar Samuel Beal published the first complete English translation in London. The book eventually became one of the world's foundational sources for the historical geography of Central and South Asia. Journey to the West introduced generations of readers to the talkative monk Tang Xuanzang. But the real Xuanzang was something else entirely. A lone traveler whose courage was driven by an unwavering search for truth. And perhaps this story belongs to each soul that ever ventured forth alone.